The fifth season of You closes the book on the story of Joe Goldberg. At the end of a pitch-perfect final 10 episodes awaits a faithful finale and a satisfying sentence for our serial romantic serial killer. This season delivered everything I wanted from it and more. I am perfectly happy with the ending, and I'm so excited to break it down. The last season feels like a return to form for the show after the detour of season 4, and ultimately the finale grounds the show as it wraps up Joe's story. I will be getting into spoilers, so if you haven't seen the season yet, that's on you. The final season picks up 3 years after Joe and Kate have returned to New York for Kate to take over as the CEO of the Lockwood Corporation. They've gotten married and regained custody of Henry, enrolling him in an expensive private school, but not therapy. Since he murdered Eddie and framed Nadia at the end of season 4, Joe has suppressed his killer instinct until the opportunity presents itself in the first episode. 3 years sober from stabbing, Joe uncovers a plot by Kate's surrogate father and business buddy Buffalo Bob to expose her role in falsifying water toxicity reports as the prodigy and covering up Reese's murder in London. When Joe finally loops in Kate, she's in disbelief and insists on handling the situation herself, leaving Joe to head out to an apartment above Mooney's, where he writes self-insert murder fiction about killing Bob. Kate catches him, and it's confirmed to the audience that she believes he killed Reese because of Tom, his father because of his mother, and his ex-wife Love to save himself and Henry. But he admits to feeling exhilarated by killing as long as it's for the right reasons. Kate's disgusted as she leaves, and Joe bitterly bemoans her lack of appreciation for his self-restraint in keeping his propensity for murder on the page. But his bitching is interrupted when he catches Bronte breaking into Mooney's downstairs. She clumsily comes up with a cover story claiming that she's been borrowing books from the store because they just look so sad, but she assures Joe that she always brings them back, and she launches into a whole spiel about appreciating books and real estate before finally recognizing Joe as Prince Charming. He's attracted to the passion in her, feeling that it's reminiscent of his younger self, and he lets her leave unscathed, for now. Backstory on Bronte: she's lying to Joe. Her real name is Louise, and she's working with some friends from the Dr. Nikki subreddit to expose Joe as Beck's murderer because she's a former student who knew Beck as her TA, and she clocked Joe's additions to default as words that Beck would never write herself, setting her on a course to take him down. Her friends include Dominique and Phoenix and Clayton, who is actually Dr. Nikki's son that has dealt with harassment against his family ever since his father's false arrest. They planned to slowly infiltrate the fringes of Joe's life, but Bronte got impatient and decided to sneak into Mooney's, almost blowing up their whole plan when she got caught, but importantly, establishing direct contact with Joe. Kate visits her Uncle Bob, not even able to wholeheartedly accuse him of plotting against her before he calls her out for returning to the company toothless instead of ruthless. He thought she'd come back with her killer instinct, but he doesn't know that it's coming for him later tonight. He laughs in her face as he tells her that she's finished before threatening to reveal her cover-up of Reese's murder so that she'll lose everything if she doesn't allow herself to be pushed out as CEO following the release of the hit piece about the pipeline. Kate relents, and now feeling as though their survival depends on it, she gives Joe permission to murder Bob. So he moseys up to Bob's house, which conveniently only has fake security cameras, and he breaks in to wake up Bob before killing him so he can relish in it, because Joe likes killing. He likes it. He enjoys doing it. As is routine, Joe forges an email in his victim's name, retracting his lies about Kate and putting out that fire for now. For a minute. Maybe less. On his way home, Joe finds Bronte sleeping in Mooney's as if she didn't just get caught the night before, but twist, it's intentional. She rushes to leave, and despite being back on track in his marriage and in this moment believing that Kate fully accepts him, Joe offers Bronte a job at Mooney's. Now, a quick pause to acknowledge that Joe is at the top of the world. He has it all. He just murdered a man with his wife's permission, and right now he has every reason to believe that his life is exactly what he wants, and he still offers Bronte a job to keep her in his orbit. Interesting. He returns home to Kate the next morning, unsure of what to expect, and when he tells her that they're okay, she reaffirms her love for him, for now. For a minute, maybe less. At Mooney's later that morning, Bronte chats up Joe for information even though she stalked him for years, and after Folie learning that he used to work at Mooney's, she angles for a raise to afford rent, which is actually an opening to allude to a messy living situation with her ex. She asks Joe what's behind the door in the back of Mooney's, and he warns her to stay out, which definitely means she's getting in there later. Joe and Kate are called to the school because Henry attacked his cousin Gretchen, Regan's daughter via Maddie as a surrogate who was bullied into it, because she called Henry's mother a killer after hearing Regan say it. Joe makes excuses for Henry and says that something must have happened because there's no way he would do this without a reason, and he claims that this is just one out of character incident, asserting that his son isn't violent. Because Joe only sees Henry as an extension of himself, so he excuses away his son's violence like he excuses his own. Joe's job as a parent is to keep Henry safe, keep him healthy, and be a good person, but his real priority is possession and controlling Henry's perception. With Henry suspended from school, Joe takes him to the bookstore where Bronte has picked the lock to the door in the basement but doesn't make it any further before they arrive. While talking about the incident, Joe reassures Henry that Love did nothing wrong, but Regan was talking about Kate because she's suspicious over Bob's convenient suicide. So Kate and Joe host Regan and Harrison for dinner to diffuse her rage and dissuade her from pressing charges against Henry. Maddie shows up for Regan's moral support and Teddy's here for Kate's. Regan demands an apology from Kate and Joe for their parenting failure that has led to Henry being violent. Kate immediately apologizes and Joe reluctantly relents, but it's not good enough for Regan, who threatens that she's going to find out what Bob had on Kate and then she's coming for everything. Just then, Henry runs out of the kitchen and throws a butter knife at Regan's head, so Joe kicks everybody out. He puts Henry to bed and meets Kate in the kitchen to suggest killing Regan, which she shuts down and insists that they're going to handle the problem above board. Kate suggests getting Henry into therapy, which sets off Joe because what does a toxic man hate more than therapy? And he takes it as a personal attack and a suggestion that Henry inherited violence from him, which is literally not what Kate's saying. Joe claims that caretakers turning their backs on children is what makes them violent, but that's what he's doing by ignoring Henry's need for professional help to address his unstable early life and ensure that he's on track towards a healthy and happy childhood. Earlier in the night, Bronte snuck into the basement and found the cage, calling it the fucking Mecca, so Dr. Nikki subreddit confirmed, and she starts to take pictures, accidentally getting herself locked in. For hours, Joe receives motion alerts on his phone, but it's not until after his fight with Kate that he finally sees them and heads to Mooney's to let her out and confront her for breaking into the basement. She plays dumb, asking what the cage is and blaming his warning to stay away for making it more enticing to sneak in. He hesitates to let her out and asks why she's really down here. She lies and says that she was taking pictures of the expensive books so she can sell them to pay off her debts because she's desperate. Joe believes her and begrudgingly lets her out of the cage and fires her from the bookstore. As she leaves, she confesses to reading his murder fiction and liking it, but she criticizes that his killer has no backstory. So she asks what he's hiding, and oh boy, does he throw a pity party. He shouts that he did one thing wrong when he was a child and got cast out like garbage, saying that he lost his mother, lost his home, and got dragged through the system only to somehow end up a Lockwood where nobody understands. Only, only, only a billionaire. And just somehow, he ended up a Lockwood, a rich and powerful Lockwood, where nobody understands. Oh, boo-hoo-hoo. Nobody understands me in my disregard for human life, in my endless pursuit of some fanatic love story of my own crafting. Oh, woe is me. I hate him. Joe says that while the Lockwoods slept on silk sheets, he slept on the floor, locked in the cage. But who fucking cares? What does that matter right now, in any way? It doesn't. Bronte apologizes but says that it's nice to meet the real him. Yeah, the real him that just pities himself and blames everything on his childhood. That's Joe in a nutshell. The next night, Joe heads to the office to abduct Regan but accidentally interrupts a roleplay with her husband, locking Harrison in a supply closet and kidnapping her to the cage in the basement of Mooney's, but plot twist, he snatched Maddie, who is having an affair with Harrison. The following morning, Joe calls Bronte back to Mooney's to apologize to her, admitting that he has been hiding certain things. She remarks that the world he lives in wouldn't understand, and Joe starts to think that she does. But why? Why? You've had like a handful of conversations and you literally just said last night that the people around you don't understand. So she's just repeating back to you what you already vented, and you think that she sees you? No, she's playing you and you're falling for it. Joe offers her job back and throws in the apartment upstairs for Bronte to stay in so that she doesn't have to keep staying with her bad vibes ex. She's excited until Joe closes the door and she starts to get nervous, and Joe questions her change in demeanor. So she admits to having read Sherry and Carrie's book about love trapping them in a cage, confessing that seeing a cage here in New York has her kind of freaked out. She realizes that the whole situation feels really messy and rightfully rushes to leave. But Joe calmly explains to her that Love got the idea from him, drawing on his earlier honesty to her about Mooney locking him in the cage as punishment. Bronte is literally halfway out the door when Joe asks her, do you have any idea how it feels to know the person you trusted most used your childhood trauma to harm other people, which pulls her back into the apartment, feeling like an asshole for being insensitive to him. Isn't it funny how that works? She felt nervous and correctly had the instinct to leave, but he delays her long enough to reel her back in with bonus points for making her feel bad for him in the process. Joe reassures her that she's smart to ask the tough questions, saying that it's what he respects about her, and offers the apartment and the job are hers if she wants them. No pressure, obviously.
This is his clever trick to make her feel safe, like she chose.
As he leaves, Bronte tells him that she's not his trope and she doesn't sleep with married men, but Joe assures her that it's nothing like that. Joe returns home and talks to Henry, finally accepting that he could benefit from therapy, so that's good. Thanks for not being an obstruction anymore, I guess. Kate apologizes to Joe for their fight the prior night and explains that she didn't want to become morally compromised like her father or an enabler like her mother, but she failed that when she asked him to handle Bob. She insists that it was a moment of weakness and they're never doing anything like that again, but Joe feels no remorse and believes that they did what they had to do to save their family. Kate argues that Henry deserves parents who are good and keep their consciences clean, but Joe says that his conscience is clean because he did it for Henry. This makes Kate question Joe's true motives, but she's interrupted by a call from Regan, prompting Joe to finally realize that it's Maddie he has trapped in the cage. He runs to Mooney's and tries suggesting to Maddie that maybe he just had some weirdo crush on her and he got jealous when he saw her with another man. But she pieces together the truth that Kate had Buffalo Bob killed, which Regan then found out, leading to Joe accidentally kidnapping her, believing she was Regan, who he planned to silence. Joe leaves Maddie to return home and convince Kate that Regan is a threat, putting them in more danger the longer she refuses to act. But she encourages him to head back to the bookstore and focus on opening, while she handles Regan because she's trying to keep him from doing something that he'll regret, still not understanding that he won't ever regret it. Joe does return to Mooney's and gets lured into an adventure with Bronte to buy books from an estate sale. Before they head out, Joe checks on Maddie, who reveals that she was abducted and held for ransom a week before she turned 16. She emotionally devastated her captor by her birthday, triggering his suicide 3 days later, allowing her to walk herself back to the beach. Cool story, Maddie. Is it real? I don't know. Joe threatens to starve her to force her cooperation, but she reminds him that she's diabetic, which means that he'll be held hostage by her body's needs, or else he'll have the mess of her death on his hands. Waiting at the car, Joe realizes that Bronte is good at getting what she wants from him, like books from this estate sale or being rehired after she broke into the basement. But that's just you giving her things because you like her. She's not getting them from you. Did that. You called her back. Like, he's wild. He's fucking wild. He wonders why he's so suspicious of her, but attributes it to his overall suspicion considering that he underestimated Maddie for years. He's not wrong to be suspicious because Bronte is specifically orchestrating situations and dropping breadcrumbs for Joe to pick up on, but I'm glad that he's doubting his own intuition too. They unpack books at Mooney's and Bronte chats up Joe about romance tropes, daring him to play out a book trope moment, but she accidentally gets caught up in it, forgetting that she's in the company of a serial killer, and rushes back to work. After packing up the car with their second load of books, Bronte notices the time and Joe offers to walk her to a writer's meetup nearby. Not long after arriving, Bronte rushes to leave after spotting Clayton, her abrasive and confrontational ex, who proceeds to publicly embarrass her by reading some old sexual writings of hers. Then he exposes to Joe that her real name is Louise Flannery and she's a dental hygienist from Ohio that stole from him for months. But of course, this is all scripted to reveal just enough truth to Joe that he can look her up and feel like he's discovering the real her, and this is what she's been hiding. Kind of like Candace's fake Instagram to dispel Beck's concerns. Meanwhile, Teddy shares the news with Kate that he's discovered proof of Regan embezzling from the company. When he asks if he should loop in Joe, Kate gives a quick no, leading Teddy to ask if she's worried that he'll strangle Regan himself, still fishing for the truth about Bob's death. Kate shows up to speak to Regan and finds her crying, confessing that Maddie was having an affair with Harrison. She apologizes for acting like a monster lately and agrees not to press charges against Henry. Kate calls Joe and reveals the news of the affair, and he fails to feign surprise, but he heads downstairs and celebrates, sharing with Maddie that Regan knows about the affair, which means that she can just run off with Harrison. But Maddie spirals into a depression, knowing that Regan is going to destroy the both of them and she'll never see her daughter again. She says that there are fates worse than death, and Joe might as well kill her. He heads upstairs to look up Louise and finds her LinkedIn and her mother's obituary, and then he finds her Goodreads, and he sees that she's read The Dark Face of Love, but everybody's read that book, and she admitted to reading Sherry and Carrie's book, so that's not really much of anything, is it? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Joe considers that she might have moved to New York to pursue her writing dream, or she might be using him. So he heads further upstairs to feel out the vibe and he finds her crying, and how could Joe help but succumb to a crying woman? She explains that she moved here and really believed that she could make a living off of her plays, and that she trusted Clayton when he said that he could help her, but all of the money that he gave her suddenly stopped being a gift when she didn't want to sleep with him anymore. She admits that a part of her knew what Clayton was like, but she liked being his wounded bird, knowing it might get her where she wanted to go faster, and Joe uses this opening to quote Beck from her book.
And you knew somewhere deep it was too good to be true, but you let yourself be swept because he was the first strong enough to lift you.
He asks Bronte if she knew that Beck worked at Mooney's, and she admits to that being the reason she originally sought out the store, saying that she felt like she saw herself in Beck's work when she was younger, and she asks about her. And Joe has the nerve to say, she was a light, as beautiful inside and out. She's a true poet. So much potential. He strangled her to death. He pulled her down the stairs, wrapped his hands around her throat, and squeezed as she fought for her life. And he kept squeezing until the last breath left her body, snuffing out the light of her life. And then he has the audacity to say that she had so much potential. I hate this man, and I wish him the worst. He admits to dating Beck briefly, but calls what happened to her a tragedy. And then he claims that he's never told anybody this, but he wishes that he had killed Dr. Nikki because Beck might still be here. Saying this as if he didn't really kill Beck starts to plant the seed of doubt in Bronte's head. Joe brings up his writing, saying that he wishes he were as strong as he is on the page, even though he literally is. He murders just the same, but he's trying to portray himself as somebody who doesn't do that. Bronte says that a lot of people deserve a little poetic justice, and Joe thinks that Bronte understands him, unlike Kate, who just wanted him to burn his pages, which are the most interesting part of him. As Joe leaves, Bronte tells him again that she's not his trope or whatever he's projecting onto her, but yeah, sorry, you are. You are. She says that she's a mess, and as much as she might enjoy it, she couldn't handle an affair right now, and right on cue, as she's telling Joe that she couldn't handle a relationship, he falls for her. He heads downstairs to the bookstore and starts writing about her before fantasizing about her coming after him and coming on to him as he masturbates to the fantasy. At home, Kate tries to reconcile with Joe, saying that she wants to handle things together, but since the murder of Buffalo Bob, she's been unable to sleep and keeps trying to think of any way they could have done things differently. Even when she can sleep, she's haunted by nightmares, and she just wants to understand why Joe isn't tormented by the guilt like she is. And he says that he doesn't feel bad about this part of himself because it makes him special and it gives him a purpose to protect her and Henry. Joe thinks that this part of him isn't scary, but it's romantic, so it's painful for him when Kate looks at him disapprovingly as he confesses to loving murder. But he insists that it's for her, and she says that she doesn't want that. But Joe argues that a part of her must, since she covered up his past and sent him after Bob. But wait, pause here a second. Kate is sitting here telling Joe, this is how I feel about what we did. It was the wrong thing to do, and we aren't going to do it again. And he's refusing to listen to her, insisting to know how she really feels, and misconstruing her role to try and convince her to believe his assertion of her. Because remember, they ended last season promising to keep each other good, with Kate telling Joe that she will say yes to everything, thinking that she could rely on him to keep her on the right path. So she closes the chapter on her father's last act and turns a blind eye to everything Joe withheld, believing it can be left in the past. But at the first sign of trouble, Joe throws murder back on the table, and Kate only comes around to it after being threatened to lose everything by a man that she's known her whole life. That doesn't make it okay. You still can't tell a known murderer to kill somebody, but the fact that she can't stop thinking about it and understands it was wrong is a stark contrast to Joe, who won't stop rationalizing away his worst action. He says that he wants to be of service to her, a knight to his queen, but she says that he can help her in any way but that. She leaves, and Joe checks his phone to find Maddie running a live stream where she admits to the affair and sees her board voting capacity to Regan, which threatens Kate's ability to control the board and vote Teddy into the open seat. Joe works up a plan for a perma-sister swap that would give Maddie the chance to live her life with Harrison and Gretchen after they sort out the damage that Regan has caused before faking her getting lost at sea. Kate takes a stand and tells Joe that she's going to handle things her way, and she heads off to fire Regan, and he jumps in the shower to go masturbate to a fantasy of Bronte. He reconvenes with Maddie to coach her on her Regan impression and then heads upstairs where Bronte surprises him with short notice that they're having a small opening event the next day. She follows him to the office to talk about bringing up the A word, and they decide to be work buds. Yeah, like how that worked out with love, right? Do you see how Joe hasn't technically given up on his marriage yet, but he's already laying the groundwork with Bronte? Even if Kate came around tomorrow and said, yes, Joe, I accept you and your penchant for blood triggered by your traumatic patricide, he would still just find a new problem. She's already started straying from his narrative by restraining him from ridding the world of Regan so she could let him loose tomorrow and he would still find a step too far and turn on her when she doesn't tolerate it. Kate meets with Regan to confront her over her embezzlement from the company, and Regan demands that Kate steps down, threatening to reveal that she covered up Joe's murder of Reese and enabled the framing of an innocent 19-year-old Nadia. One of these things is worse than the other, and it's the murder cover-up. I love Kate, but I don't want to act like she isn't complicit. C is for complicit, and that's what you could call Kate. Bronte asks Joe to read her writing for feedback, and he loves it, calling it a thoughtful take on toxic romance and saying that he feels like he got a glimpse of the real her. He's intrigued by the nameless male character that pursues the huntress against her will, and his cruelty, it was real. Of course, that's the character that Joe relates to. This should be a big red flag for Bronte. She is baiting him with the story crafted to curate how he sees her, and it's working, but he's creeping his way into her head as well. Bronte explains that her writing is influenced by her history of dating shitty men, and Joe says that if it were up to him, he'd line them up in front of a firing squad. Who says that shit? To which Bronte agrees that sometimes she thinks witnessing an abuser's punishment would be all she needs to heal. And maybe that's what it is when I see Joe in jail at the end of the show. Healing in my heart. Her comment triggers more doubt in Joe, questioning the glimmers of a dark side that he thinks he might see in her, but she quickly distracts him by bringing up D&D alignment, once again bringing up a topic to get a read on Joe. She explains that chaotic good are messy and they make mistakes, but they have good hearts and they will break the rules for the right reasons. And she says that all of the best romance leads are morally gray dudes who will beast out to protect the people that they love. Of course, Joe identifies with that alignment and realizes that he's spent years looking for the one who truly understands him, and he's starting to think it could be Bronte. But do you see how she did that and turned it back on him? He started to doubt her, and she distracted him with something that fits his narrative of believing he's a good guy doing the right thing for the people that he loves, and he's moved on from that suspicion for now. Tricks. She's got tricks. She goes on to explain that chaotic evil actually want to hurt people, and that sounds like Regan to Joe, but it sounds like Joe to me. He returns home and Kate tells him that Regan knows everything and she's going to resign to protect their family, saying that they can move away and start over with money that she has on an offshore account, which would be fine. They could leave and be fine just with less money and less power, but Joe won't accept that. Kate tells him that she realized how easy it would be for her to let him kill Regan after how smug she was acting, but Kate hates that part of herself. She hates that she has that capability in her, and she hates that Joe won't even try to control it in himself. She says this isn't some romantic fantasy, it's reality where we accept our losses and we move on. While she says this, story-wise, she still hasn't realized what it actually means for her to accept her losses in this case, but she'll get there. Give her time. Joe got 5 seasons. Kate gets a little time, okay? Kate isn't even giving up on Joe at this point. She's just trying to get him on the same page again of doing things above board and keeping each other good like they promised to do. But even as she just said this isn't a romantic fantasy, Joe says that it's time to beast out, so he sneaks into Regan's house to abduct her, but she fights him off and escapes. He chases her from pool room to pool room where she unmasks him before getting away outside until he catches up to her and hits her in the head with a bowling pin. Knock, knock. Who's there? Bowling pin. Bowling pin who? I'm gonna hit you in the head with a bowling pin. After putting Regan in the cage with Maddie, he reveals to Maddie that she has to kill her sister with an insulin shot in order to be released, so Joe knows that she can't rat him out without incriminating herself. He warns her that he'll kill them both if she doesn't comply, and she realizes that this was his plan the whole time, regretting that she trusted him and calling him a liar. Meanwhile, at Mooney's, Bronte found Joe's racy writings about her that were both romantic and explicit and a giant freaking red flag, but Bronte's falling for it. Hook, line, and sink her. When Regan wakes up in the cage, Maddie explains the situation and Regan just laughs at the suggestion that Maddie could possibly be her. Maddie derides Regan as being incapable of loving anybody but herself. Upstairs at the opening, Clayton and Dom show up. There was originally a plan to have an orchestrated confrontation to give Joe the opportunity to jump in and expose that he's violent in front of a crowd, but Bronte tried to call it off because internally, she's starting to have mixed feelings about Joe after reading his writings. So Joe lurks nearby as Clayton grabs Bronte's arm, so he grabs Clayton and shoves him against the bookshelf. Clayton is shaken, being inches from the man who murdered a woman and framed his father for it, and he rushes out of the bookstore with Dom. Bronte heads outside to get some air, confused confused about her feelings for Joe, and he follows her, not giving her space to think or process the violent side of him that she just saw, and he persists in talking to her as she's distressed and saying that she's not supposed to feel this way about him. She's confused by his romantic and sexual writings about her when he has a wife, and she says that this can never be anything, so it doesn't matter what they feel. Joe returns to the basement to find that Maddie has actually killed Regan, and she demands to be released. At a meeting the next day, Maddie Regan interrupts Kate's resignation announcement to announce her own leave as CFO of the Lockwood Corp, but retains her board seat while passing her voting capacity to Maddie going forward. Kate is surprised, and believing that this is Regan, she raises the vote of giving Teddy the board seat, and Regan's support acts as confirmation to Kate that Joe has intervened behind her back. Kate confronts Joe, and he claims that he just called Regan's bluff, and it turns out that she didn't actually have anything concrete on them anyway, but Kate doesn't believe him and walks away. And again, Joe internally rages at Kate's ingratitude that he pulled off a near miracle while keeping her hands clean, and yet she doesn't appreciate what he does for her. But that's abuser stuff. She said that she would handle the problem, and she specifically begged him to stay out of it. He got involved anyway, disregarded what she wanted, ignored what she pleaded, undermined her plan, continued lying about it afterward, and now he feels wrong and victimized because Kate isn't happy. Joe realizes that his marriage isn't in a stalemate, it's broken. Because she doesn't want him killing people, that's it. That's the impasse here. The next morning at the bookstore, Bronte is packing up to leave, and Joe tries to convince her to stay, apologizing, telling her not to go, and narrating that she could destroy him. But he would rather burn down the world than let her walk out that door, and that's crazy and violent and not romantic. Every time Bronte gets the inclination to leave, Joe stops her, and every time she lets him stop her, it gets harder and harder to leave him. But whoops, that doesn't matter right now because they lean in for a passionate kiss and start making out and hook up in the office for real, not a fantasy. They start having a full-blown affair because at this point, Joe is checked out of his marriage and happy to write out this new love story with Bronte, which is so special and different and definitely going to work out unlike every other story before. Even though she came into this working with her friends to infiltrate Joe's life and expose him as a murderer, she's really started getting caught up in the intoxicating romance of it, letting herself be charmed by Joe. She might still know deep down that he killed Beck, which was her whole reason for getting involved with him in the first place, but that part of her is getting lost as she's wrapped up in the whirlwind romance. Kate decides that it's time to take the blinders off and calls Cynthia to request everything that she had scrubbed about Joe to be sent to her in an encrypted file. Maddie Regan acts like a terror at home as she pretends to be her terrible sister while being haunted by her memory because it's safe to assume that a lifetime of bullying doesn't protect you from the trauma of being forced to murder your twin. Joe starts to spoil Bronte, filling her fridge with groceries and ordering her a massage, fully funded by his wife that he's cheating on. Huh, how funny. Cheating is fine when Joe does it? Bronte exposes their affair to Kate as she runs outside with no pants after the masseuse to give her a tip, and I feel like there was any other way for Kate to discover that, but okay. Kate cries to Teddy that she feels like a fool because she believed that they could just have a happily ever after, and she ignored everything from Joe's past, believing that it was all behind him. After learning that Joe had an affair with a woman who is now missing, Marianne, just weeks before Love's murder, Teddy realizes that Joe killed Bob, but Kate still holds back her own involvement and insists that she can handle taking care of Joe without going to the police. Joe reads Bronte's latest pages and they head upstairs to have a kinky hookup, but Bronte panics and calls it off, rightfully so. Joe leaves to deal with urgent text from Maddie, who wants to accelerate the timeline to being herself again because she's haunted by her sister and spiraling into a pill addiction. Joe just tells her to stay the course and heads to the bookstore. He finds a note from Bronte that she's left town, which he can't accept. She can't have the free will to leave his life. That's not allowed. It dawns on Joe that he just got dumped as he tries to call her disconnected number and send texts that don't go through. He wonders why she would leave him, suspecting that maybe she ran off with Clayton, and strengthens his suspicion when he checks Clayton's Instagram story. To avoid jumping to conclusions and to rule it out but to really rule it in, Joe sends a bait email to Clayton to find out if he's in the city. At home, Kate was supposed to play it cool and hide what she knows about Joe, but that doesn't go so well when Henry finds a knife that Kate has hidden under her pillow, a giant knife that Joe takes to confront her with afterward. He asks her after 3 years of marriage, what's changed? You didn't keep each other good, and you want to murder people. That's what changed. Kate tells him to stop acting like a victim and calls him out on being a liar, demanding to know what he did to Regan. She accuses him of killing Love and confronts him over his affair with Bronte, dares him to deny it so that she can see how he looks when he's lying to her to recontextualize the last 3 years. While Joe thought there was a time when Kate understood him, she asks how she ever could when he never told her the whole truth. Joe tries to manipulate the situation, weaponizing Kate's past and her guilt over it, and redirecting Beck to the knife that she had to protect herself from him, focusing only on her having it in their bed where their son found it, and not having any self-awareness at all to understand that Kate is hiding a knife in her bed out of fear of her husband, the same exact way that Joe's mother hid a gun in the closet out of fear of his father. So he changes tactics and puts the knife in her hand, insisting that if he is who she says, that she should stab him. But unfortunately, this is only episode 5, so her character isn't there in her journey yet. We could have ended this a lot quicker if she had just get done, Kate. He accuses Kate of using him as if he didn't 100% want to kill Bob on his own and only delayed it for any amount of time because Kate specifically said no. She considers her options but insists that their split will be amicable and announces to Joe that they're getting a divorce. So Joe leaves to break into Clayton's apartment, learning from his laptop that he's in Atlantic Beach. He gets a call from Bronte telling him to forget about her, and when she hangs up, he calls back to get the diner's address and follows that to find out from a waiter that she went to a beach house. He breaks in and gets tased by Bronte, leaving 2 little marks on his neck like a vampire bite. While he's temporarily unconscious, Bronte calls Dom and tells her not to come back to the beach house. Joe wakes up and confronts Bronte about being with Clayton and asking why she ran away. She explains that things got too real and repeats that she's not his trope and she didn't want to be the other woman. But then he started treating her like an actual princess and she realized how good it made her feel and how she never wanted anything more, which means that Joe has so much power over her and she is terrified by that. So Joe announces that he's getting a divorce, giving Bronte the chance to be the one. She asks why he trusts her with his happiness, and he says that what they have between them could be real, but it can't, because he's not being real, but insisting that this fantasy he's offering her could be real as long as she goes along with him. He says that she holds all of the power and she's just afraid of who they could become if they were together, and she let him lift her up and put her in the center of the universe where she belongs. And he says he would rather fire consume them both than watch her waste another second of her life getting less than she deserves. It's just words, but she's believing him. He is telling her what feels nice to hear, especially for somebody with such a small life having to drop out of college to take care of her mother until she died. Hearing that she deserves more and can be better and he can help her achieve that is alluring to Bronte. Of course, she would want to believe that somebody sees her that way, and Joe understands that and weaponizes that against her. She pushes back, thinking that he wouldn't say that if he knew the real her, but he dares her to prove him wrong, and they head upstairs to hook up. Kate shows up to confront Regan, who's been ignoring her texts, and Maddie tries to trick her, but it doesn't work out, and she ends up in a puddle on the floor, revealing to Kate that Joe forced her to kill Regan. Kate loops in Teddy about Maddie murdering Regan after they were both abducted by Joe. She finally admits to him that she recently asked Joe to kill Bob, and previously covered up his murder of Reese Montrose in London. Teddy wants no part of this mess and warns Kate that complicity has consequences, finally setting her on a course to right what she can at whatever the personal cost may be. After their hookup, Joe gets dressed as Bronte heads downstairs. She's surprised when Clayton comes in and confronts him over risking her life, but he ignores her, and as they argue, he shoves her, which causes a commotion, drawing Joe downstairs. Clayton punches Joe, who tackles him and starts strangling him before he looks to Bronte and smashes Clayton's head on the fireplace to kill him. Dominique and Phoenix burst into the room, live streaming the aftermath of what just happened as Phoenix sobs over Clayton's dead body. Joe is like a deer in headlights as he realizes that they need to leave, but he hears Dom say, "We got him, Louise," and realizes that they catfished him. He's booked into jail and released with the help of Kate's lawyers, unknowingly signing away temporary custody of Henry to Kate. Bronte is interviewed by Detective Marquez and explains their plan to catfish Joe and get justice for Guinevere Beck. The episode flashes back to a time in season 1 where Beck is heading to meet Louise as her TA to discuss her latest writing assignment. As she shows up, she's on the phone with Joe, who's trying to convince her to ditch work to run off for some romantic weekend. Louise says bye to Joe so that she can hang up, and after reviewing her pages, Beck praises her work but criticizes her reference to A Doll's House. Beck dismisses A Doll's House because it was written by a man who called himself a humanist, and Beck challenges Louise to read a feminist work written by a woman. This interaction is important because this detail and Beck having this relationship and connection with somebody who actually knows her is the first step in Joe's downfall. For all of his talk about it, Joe didn't love Beck and he didn't know her, exposed by the dollhouse reference that he includes when he pieces together Beck's writings into the Dark Face of Love book. He supposedly appreciated her love of reading and writing and literature, but he didn't know enough to write in her voice or reference works that were actually meaningful to her because he didn't know her. Not really. He was busy gazing at a fucking fantasy. Louise thanks Beck for seeing her and encouraging her in her writing, but reveals that she has to drop out to move home to take care of her sick mother. Beck gives her a book, signing it with a Bronte quote.
I am no bird, and no net ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will, which I now exert to leave you.
Back in Ohio, Louise sees the news of Beck's death on TV and later reads her book as a way to hold on to her, but starts to notice parts of her book that don't seem like they were written by her. So she ends up finding the Dr. Nikki subreddit and connecting with a few others interested in the case and giving them the missing piece of Joe's identity as Beck's unnamed boyfriend from the book. Clayton reveals that he's listened to his dad's therapy session recordings, hearing all about Beck's relationship problems with Joe, but also suspecting that Joe started seeing Dr. Nikki under the fake name Paul Brown. Bronte explains to the detective that they believe Joe was a serial killer based on their years of theorizing and gathering evidence, so they wanted to expose him. After her mom died, her friends became her family, and they assumed it was all over when they heard that Joe was killed by love. But one day, Louise reads the news that Joe is alive and well in New York, and she grabs the book that Beck gave her, reflecting on the quote she left, and she decides that she wants to head out and expose Beck's killer. That's her goal, that's her plan, that's what she sets out to do. Her friend's plan of slowly getting into the fringes of Joe's life just isn't fast enough for Bronte, so she breaks into Mooney's, and once she actually sees Joe in person, he's not an idea anymore, he's real. She didn't tell her friends about seeing him the first time, but they followed her the second time and confronted her after she got caught. She felt exhilarated after meeting him and thinks that he liked her, which they could use to their advantage now that she's made direct contact. Bronte being hired to Mooney's got her a look at the cage that she knew about from Karen Minty posting online. And when she found his story, she recognized his fantasy of being a white knight saving a wounded bird, so they created her persona and expanded her world around that idea and took a step to reveal just enough of the truth to make Joe feel like he found something on her. But Joe's comment about wishing that he had killed Dr. Nikki really got in her head and planted a seed of doubt, causing her to start questioning everything she knows. Joe might totally believe that if he killed Dr. Nikki, Beck wouldn't have cheated on him and things would have been different. He's wrong, but the strength of his conviction is convincing to her. In the interview, she admits that it wasn't just a single moment when she realized that he wasn't who she thought he was, saying that it just kind of snuck up on her after he was tender and protective while Clayton was losing perspective and getting aggressive with her. Joe returns home and Kate can't contain her disgust at Joe's inability to control his bloodlust. He tries fake humility, fail. He tries fake flattery, fail. She confronts him for killing her sister, but defends himself saying that Regan was horrible and technically Maddie did it, and she reiterates that he killed her sister. Joe asks what he can do, saying that he'll do anything as if there is anything he could do, and also sorry he wants to fix things with his wife now? When did that happen? She demands that he stays away from her and Henry, so he threatens her with a reminder that she's still complicit in his crimes. Isn't that interesting? Do you see how he's cycling through different tactics to try and regain control of the situation? Joe realizes that it's too quiet, heading to Henry's room and finding it empty. He returns downstairs to confront Kate, and bro, she is ready to go. Sitting on the couch with a drink in hand, knowing that Joe's about to come back downstairs and lose his shit, but dude, she is not afraid of him. He shouts, "Where's his son?" and she yells back that he's safe. I love that. Joe spits venom that she isn't his mother but just a replacement, and she says that helping him take Henry from Dante and Lansing was one of the worst things that she's ever helped him do. Which is crazy because she's helped him kill people. She calls him out for abandoning his son once already to chase a woman across the world and run from all of the people he's killed, and now he's fallen for a new woman and he's killed more people, so why wouldn't she think that he would just abandon his son again? Joe warns that she'll never take his son, but she says that it's already done thanks to the temporary custody agreement that Joe signed without reading when he was bailed out of jail. He calls her a monster and tries to lunge at her, but she hits him in the throat and warns of the armed security in the kitchen. She plans to allow him access to a family's resources as long as he behaves, and then kicks him out. Bronte's police interview continues, and she blames herself for knowing that Joe was a romantic, but not anticipating that he would track her down and break into the beach house. Let me repeat that. She blames herself for him stalking her and breaking into her house. Her perspective of the situation is distorted because, first of all, she's conflating him stalking her to the beach house with romantic behavior, which it isn't. And second, because she is taking responsibility for not anticipating Joe's actions in order to prevent his violence. That's crazy, girl. Bronte reasons that Clayton put her in a situation where he thought Joe could kill her, and he kept getting physically aggressive with her. Meanwhile, Joe was the one who jumped in to protect her after being made to think that Clayton was a threat. So while Dominique and Phoenix tell the police that Joe killed Clayton in a rage, Bronte concludes that it was self-defense. It wasn't, because even if Clayton was a threat, that doesn't warrant Joe brutally bashing his brains on the hearth. But Bronte says that Clayton started the fight, so what Joe did wasn't murder. But it was, because as much as Joe did fall for their orchestrated storyline, that is not why he killed Clayton. Joe did not kill Clayton because that's what any reasonable man would do if he was fed the same perspective. A reasonable man would intervene, throw a few punches maybe, and not commit murder. But Joe killed Clayton because he likes killing people. He made the choice to do that. It wasn't an accident. But Bronte is being primed to believe that it is because she's doubting that he's capable of just killing in cold blood. Joe moves into the apartment and narrates that he'll burn this town to the ground before he'll let Kate take his son. And oh my god, have you ever noticed how annoying Joe is? I'll burn the world for you. I'll burn the world to stop you. I'll burn us both down rather than spend another second letting you be an unspecial loser. I'll do anything for you. I'll do everything for you. I'll be your everything. You won't need anyone else. It'll just be the two of us against the world. PSA, nobody can solve all of your problems or be the best at everything or have all of the answers, and anybody claiming to be that person is lying to you, especially when they try to shrink your world and cut off relationships or sources of information that could cut through their bullshit and remind you that you are a human being with independent will, which you can exert to leave them at any time. It's never too late. Joe finds a hidden camera Bronte left behind in the apartment and angrily declares they aren't done with each other yet, not knowing that she gave a statement that he acted in self-defense. As headlines spread the next day, Joe questions where's the context in his side of the story, because if he could just tell his side, then you would understand everything. He remarks that there is nothing as painful as being misunderstood, and that's so true, bestie, but maybe being killed to death hurts worse. Joe harasses Kate with volatile, emotional voicemails demanding his son, and then starts blaming Bronte for his current predicament because there is no possible action in this series of events leading to Clayton's death that Joe could have done differently to not murder him. He couldn't have just stayed home and ran his bookstore? Joe meets with his lawyers and learns that Clayton's family is pressing charges and he was Dr. Nikki's son, connecting the dots and realizing that Bronte was working to exonerate Dr. Nikki for a minute, maybe less. His lawyer expects that they have a good defense and can regain custody of his son in a few months, but Joe can't wait a few months because he thinks that every minute Kate is with Henry, she could be dripping poison into his ear. Because that's what matters, how Henry sees Joe. And of course, Joe thinks that Kate would poison Henry against him because that is absolutely what he would do. And his concern is what Henry thinks of him, not Henry's welfare. But Henry's perception of Joe is what matters to him right now, and that's why he needs his son back in his possession so he can control what Henry believes about him. It's all about control. Joe wants to possess and control Henry just like Tom did to Kate. Kate's counsel advises her to make a public statement that she was blindsided by the affair, but she can't prematurely turn on Joe while she attempts to untangle herself from him on other matters. Teddy arrives and asks Kate why they can't speak out against Joe, but she knows that he would retaliate, putting her in jail or putting her in the ground. She asks Teddy to take Henry to an apartment that Joe doesn't know about until she handles matters. Dominique and Phoenix ask Louise to help record their takedown video of Joe to get the snowball rolling after the police failed to press charges. They don't know that she defended Joe, but she declines to help and starts packing to leave and explains that she will be part of taking down an innocent man, revealing that she thinks Joe saved her from Clayton, who was vicious and attacked her after putting her in danger. Dom realizes that Louise is confused by the cosplay of living as Bronte and encourages her to go home to clear her head of this, but she leaves and heads back to New York. Kate meets with Maddie Regan to offer her a stay at a rehab spa to help her recover from everything that's happened, regretting her inability to protect her from Joe. Maddie accepts Kate's offer, and Kate texts her lawyer that Maddie is sorted, working to ensure her siblings are situated before making a move against Joe. Joe tricks a tracker into Henry's hands to later locate the apartment where he's staying with Teddy. When Teddy opens the door to grab a delivery, Joe rushes in and refuses to leave as Teddy grabs a knife to hold him off. But Joe snatches the knife as Henry watches from the stairs, scared by what he's seeing, and Joe tells Henry that he hasn't left him before getting pulled away by security. This didn't need to happen, and it probably wasn't good for Henry that it did, but Joe doesn't care about that. Not really. He gets home and he checks his phone to find that he's trending after Dom and Phoenix's video went viral, accusing him of disappearing Candace and Benji, killing Beck, and putting out a call to action for anybody with information to come forward. Kate arrives to the secret apartment and Teddy realizes that he was actually lucky to be spared of their father's influence and finally tells off Kate for her complicity and leaves her with a plea to do something. Online, Annika accuses Joe of having murdered Peach, and Paco defends Joe, sharing the story of Joe, quote, literally saving him and his mom from her boyfriend, which Dominique and Phoenix used to point out that parole officer Ron has been a missing person since 2019. Just saying. Joe blackmails Maddie into helping him rehabilitate his image through a livestream interview with Kim Kramer, who usually takes down toxic men, adding to the credibility of his favorable interview. Maddie preps him, explaining that he needs to admit to his mistakes without naming them and apologize if he caused any pain, and then tease a little childhood trauma. Joe thinks this sounds cynical, but I'm pretty sure he's done it like 3 times this season already, so shut up. And don't cry on camera, Maddie warns him. Maddie makes some comment leading Joe to insist that he's not doing this for popularity, and she sees right through that bullshit. Oh yeah, no, I know. It's about Henry. You always have a good reason. Bronte shows up to Mooney's and watches the interview from outside. Kim jumps right into questioning Joe's affair with his younger employee, and Joe admits that his wife Kate has only ever been a great partner and mother to his son. Oh, your son. Interesting. It's about possession. It's about control. That's it. That's all he ever wants. Control over his image, control over how he's perceived, control over the people around him, control over the narrative, control over the dolls in his life that serve to play out the story he desires. Kim asks if Joe loved Louise Flannery, and Joe says that she was the biggest mistake of his life without realizing how true that's going to be by the end. After hearing this, she texts Joe that she defended him, by the way, and books a ticket back home to Ohio. Kim continues to ask about the larger allegations, and Joe deflects by showing her to the cage in the basement. He shows it off and explains that it was built by Mooney, but breaks down confessing that he would be locked in it for days at a time. Sad. Bad, not a justification to become a serial killer. I don't doubt that Joe is actually triggered by the cage remembering being locked in there. That changes nothing. Or maybe it makes it worse because he knows what that is like and he still does it to other people. After reading Bronte's text, Joe resumes the interview and redacts his statement about her, admitting that he was captivated by her and taken on a ride. He brushes off all of his trauma and explains that he's a normal guy at heart. And watching this clip in the trailer, I could not have imagined that the unknown person he was talking to was actually 1 million people on a TikTok live stream. Joe says his heart goes out to Clayton's family, but he believed that Bronte was in danger, so he saved her. In her bedroom, Kate curses him and Henry overhears the live stream asking what his dad is doing. Kate tells him that Joe's done something bad and they're going to London because she's also done something bad and she has to make it better. Joe successfully shifts the tide of the narrative in his favor, which enables a slew of videos demonizing Bronte for baiting Joe into a murder and turning him in. Joe says it's like clockwork, the reliable misogyny of the internet, and given some of the reactions I've seen to this season, I think so. I actually feel bad for some viewers who can't engage with the show any deeper than killing fun, woman I'm not attracted to, bad. Joe finds a video suggesting that somebody needs to teach her a lesson, wink wink, nudge nudge, and a profile in the comments appears to actively be stalking her, so Joe jumps into gear to stalk the stalker who is stalking the stalker who stalked the stalker. Who stalks the stalker? Me. Bronte walks down the street, stopping to help a man who drops some boxes only to be forced into his van. Joe stops him, secretly relocating him to the cage for now. Headlines are back on Joe's side, justifying his violence in the name of love, so Joe considers that he might be able to forgive Bronte for what she did to him, which means that in this moment, he doesn't know if he's going to run off with her or kill her. It's a coin toss. It could go either way for him right now. Joe returns to the apartment, twirling as he takes off his jacket, and I could not have guessed that the scene in the trailer would have revealed that he had Bronte handcuffed to his bed. Waiting for Bronte to wake up, Joe makes breakfast and ruminates on every time that he was rejected when he was seen for who he really was, and wonders if Bronte will be the one to accept him or if she'll just be the woman who destroyed his life, meaning he'll have to kill her. Joe will decide to either cherish or choke this woman based on her willingness to play the complacent, complicit companion role that he writes for her. When Bronte wakes up, Joe calmly explains away the handcuffs as just a precaution so that she didn't walk on her swollen ankle that, plot twist, Joe purposely broke when he hijacked Dane's abduction to slow her down and give them time to talk when she woke up. Bronte broaches the case of catfishing and explains that she was Beck's student and got involved with others online after reading her book, and she just went down this Reddit rabbit hole believing that Joe could be Beck's actual killer. But as she got to know him, she started to believe that they could be wrong, and she does admit that her feelings for him weren't real at first, but they became real because she just couldn't think of him as a monster the more that she talked to him. Kate arrives in London to meet with Nadia in prison and confesses to her that she covered up the DNA evidence tying Joe to Reese's murder and learns from Nadia that Joe was the Eat the Rich killer. Nadia notes how obvious it was because it was. Joe met Kate and she wasn't into him, and then he saved her from a mugging and she still wasn't into him, but wouldn't you know, killing her boyfriend? That got him an in. Kate admits that she didn't know because she didn't, but she plans to get Nadia released from prison and promises that she's going to put Joe away forever. And she does, so cool. Over breakfast, Joe challenges Bronte to tell him something true, which leads to her reflecting on having the thought to give her mother extra pain meds one day so that she would peacefully pass in her sleep, but she never went through with it, and she wonders if she was cruel to let her suffer instead of ending it for her. So Bronte demands the truth back from Joe, and he admits that he wanted to kill Clayton, and when he looked over at her, he thought a part of her did too. She says that both scares and comforts her, which is weird and bad, Bronte, and Joe asks if she wants to leave, but she says that she wants to be here with him. Satisfied with that answer, Joe lets her live for now and leads her to the basement where he has Dane trapped in a cage as an offering for Bronte. Judging by the zip ties in his van, Joe can only assume what violence Dane had planned for Bronte, but a life with him means that nobody would ever hurt her again, except for him, so he gives her a choice of what he does to Dane. Across town, Maddie blows her cover and knocks out Harrison in a moment of panic, so Joe leaves Bronte to talk to Dane to determine his fate. Dane wakes up in the cage, and after initial resistance, he admits that he wanted to teach Bronte a lesson because women like her are always selling guys out, which is insane on its own, but crazier when you remember that she didn't sell out Joe, she actually did the opposite and she covered for him. Bronte points out the irony of Dane purportedly coming to the defense of the man who put him in a cage now and asks what he was going to do with her after he successfully abducted her. He doesn't answer and he just aggressively demands to be let out, calling her a whore as she taps on the glass and observes his outburst. After a timeout for the little baby to calm down, Bronte digs into Dane's feelings about his mom, discovering that he thinks she was just perfect and no woman could ever measure up to her because she was just the epitome of what a woman should be, which kind of sounds like Joe's saint of a mother. Dane lets it slip that his mom is sick, and Bronte relates to what he's going through as she took care of her mom until she passed, which causes Dane to break down in tears. As they talk, Dane ends up apologizing for attacking her and realizes that she's actually not so bad, but resolving to be more careful next time, meaning he'll only attack a woman, female, that actually deserves it. Bronte tells him that nobody deserves what he planned to do and says that her friend Beck was murdered by an angry, fragile little shitheel like him, technically meaning Dr. Nikki, but realistically referring to Joe, who she currently believes to be different from Dane. But he's not. Make no mistake, Dane and Joe are both abusive, violent men that dehumanize women to justify hurting them. Dane formed his idea of Bronte based on his own misogyny and the misinformation that he stews in. He projected onto her everything that he hates to justify making her a target of his violence. Kind of like Joe projecting all of his shit onto imaginary Reese so that he could show up with zip ties and torture and kill the real Reese. I think Joe is actually just jealous of the real Reese. I don't know. I think maybe subconsciously he wanted to kill the real guy because he made something of himself, didn't he? And Joe just doesn't like that he can't do the same. As they talk, Dane realizes that Bronte isn't any of the terrible things that he projected onto her that allowed him to dehumanize her, and now that he sees her as just a person, he doesn't want to hurt her anymore. Kind of like Bronte coming after Joe, believing he's a serial killer, and then humanizing him once she talks to him, thinking that he couldn't have done those things. But he hasn't learned anything in the process because he thinks he just needs to be better about picking his targets, not understanding that nobody should be targeted for what he wants to do. He has no place to exert that violence against somebody else. In the same vein, Joe projects his own ideas onto a woman to justify doing violence in pursuit of her. He'll use it to hack away at the parts of her life that he doesn't like and shape her into this imaginary ideal of the one. But when she doesn't fit his fantasy anymore, he doesn't have to stop thinking of her as a person to hurt her because he kind of never did. Lady Phoebe meets Kate in London and learns about Joe being the Eat the Rich killer. And then Kate discreetly gets Nadia released from prison and tries to recruit her to take down Joe. Nadia tells Kate that her father died from the stress and heartache of the trial, questioning how she could ask for anything but forgiveness. But Kate knows that what she's done is unforgivable and recognizes that what she can do now is make Joe pay. After Kate puts Henry to bed, he uses Lady Phoebe's phone to call Joe, telling him they're in London and going to Oxford. When Joe asks what they're doing in London, Henry cuts right to the point, asking if Joe is going to jail. So Joe wants to talk to Kate, angry that she took his child overseas, and she calls him out as the Eat the Rich killer, telling him that he'll never see Henry again. Joe leaves Maddie and Harrison both on board with his plan and returns to the basement where Bronte stayed around to wait for him after releasing Dane from the cage. Feeling like the whole setup was actually a test, she locks herself in the cage and prompts Joe to ask her anything, knowing that there's no lying in there. She confirms that she's not catfishing him and does love him, and then goes on to explain that it's enough for her that he wants to protect her from every guy like Dane, but she let him go because she needs autonomy, which he's never going to give her. And you know how I know? Because he went and killed Dane. He gave her the choice of what to do. She chose to let him go, and he says, I'm gonna kill him anyway. They switch places, and Bronte asks Joe if he's ever killed anybody innocent, and my first thought is Eddie, Reese, Beck, but then I remember he has only ever killed anybody innocent because it is not his place to decide guilt and play executioner. Of course, he denies killing anyone innocent, but admits that he does enjoy killing people. To which Bronte tries to argue that he doesn't, and he's just convinced himself that he has to in order to deserve love. She thinks that the dark side of him that took over was just the protector that little Joe needed when his mother left. She offers him the chance to love without having to kill for it, but she's wrong. In her assessment of him and his motives, she is wrong about him. She thinks that she understands him and his trauma, and she thinks that she's fixing him, but she's not. She's just sharing in his delusion. Folie Deux, Folie Deux, Folie Deux, Folie Deux. Joe realizes that every heartache and mistake and life he took was necessary to lead him to Bronte, okay Ted Mosby, and they hook up on the shitty mattress in the cage like a couple of freaks. Kate and Nadia meet with their lawyer and learn that it could take years to fully prosecute Joe. With his ears burning, he calls Kate over FaceTime and demands his son back, but Kate says that one day Henry will know that he's a serial killer, and Joe counters by calling Kate a kid killer. But it's funny how he sees it that way now, because before he thought that she was forced to falsify paperwork by her father when she was just a kid. But now that they're at odds, all context gets removed, and it's merely an insult to hit Kate where he knows it hurts her most. Kate tells Nadia that she can't wait years because she knows that he won't stop, so she's relieved to realize what Nadia has known all along, that they need to kill Joe. At the apartment, Joe asks Bronte where she could go if she could choose anywhere, and she dreams of visiting a castle because she's literally living in a fantasy land. Despite being on board with the original cover-up, Joe frames Harrison for murdering Regan and exposes Maddie for impersonating her sister to lure Kate back to the country. Maddie calls her in a panic, confused and enraged that Joe would betray them, but Kate reassures her that she'll handle everything. Kate rejoins Nadia, who hopes that Joe will take the bait, tracking their earbuds to lure him into a trap of their own. With Maddie and Harrison in jail, Kate pivots their plan for their hitman to imprison Joe in the cage instead, so that they can extract the necessary confessions in exchange for faux concessions, or false promises, I guess you could call them. As Joe and Bronte walk through the park, he asks about her healed ankle and she asks about his wounded arm. He says that he cut himself unbinding a book, but he actually stashed a key in the cut on his arm like a freaking freak. Chatting about the Lockwood scandal that he's unleashed, Joe explains to Bronte that people at the level of wealth as the Lockwoods exist in a different reality, fairer, and that human life just matters less, which is a wild-ass thing for Joe serial killer Goldberg to say. He repeats the claim that Kate gave kids cancer in pursuit of profit, a different way of saying that she falsified reports for her father, which is how Joe described it in the first episode, when he supposedly loved Kate, but now it's completely different, because Kate's bad. He implies to Bronte that Kate was only faking her guilt over her past because she asked him to kill when she needed somebody gone, even though it was more like she allowed him to do something that he already wanted to do and thoroughly enjoyed doing and probably would have done anyway, even if she continued to say no. That doesn't make it okay on her part, but Joe is presenting himself like a reluctant participant for pity points when it was his idea in the first place. Bronte concludes that Kate was yet another person that made Joe prove his love through killing, and whatever you might think about Kate co-signing Bob's murder, that is not what happened. Joe's not put in a position to prove his love. He was unleashed, but he was not forced to do anything. It was his idea to kill Bob. He wanted to, and she gave him the okay in a time of weakness and betrayal. Still bad, but not in line with how he's portraying it. Bronte gets an email from a publisher wanting to meet with her thanks to Joe making a few calls. Aw, how sweet. It seems like a favor, like he's supporting you until you actually find success and he tries to hold you back and uses everything that he's done for you against you. You know, like in your fake story from Clayton, or the line from Beck's book that this man quoted to you. Joe starts researching castles to whisk Bronte off on a romantic getaway to the perfect place for a writing retreat, but discovers that Kate's drained his accounts and evicted him from Mooney's. Because of course she did. Because you can't run off with your 27-year-old affair partner on your wealthy wife's dime when she's divorcing you. Why would you think your life should work that way? How can you seriously be mad at Kate for taking away stuff that wasn't yours in the first place? It's bad for Joe, but it's good for his relationship being thrust into a crisis like this, positioning Bronte to be the supportive girlfriend to Joe and giving Joe the chance to reaffirm that it's the two of them against the world. So Bronte heads off to her meeting, and ready to take on his queen, Joe decides that it's off with her head. Kate meets with Teddy to tell him that she's stepping down as CEO and nominating him to take her place, with the board's enthusiastic support to have a Lockwood that's unlike the others. Teddy picks up on a sense of finality from Kate, asking if she's okay, and she says that she's not, but she will be. Joe continues tracking the bait buds when Bronte calls him with news about her meeting. She was offered a book deal to write their story, and Joe is immediately excited at the thought because who wouldn't want to live vicariously through their most romantic love story? And he wants her to write about him and how special he is because he doesn't actually care about what she wants to write. Bronte would rather write her dark romance, which is different from her story with Joe. I'm not so sure that it is. But she decides to go for it and save that for a second book, setting aside what she really wants to do what Joe wants her to do. And how great is it that he basically got her that book deal by setting up the meeting and being the inspiration for the story that they want. I'm sure he won't ever use that against her. Joe follows a decoy Kate and gets abducted by the hitman and locked in the cage by Kate and Nadia. Kate offers for Joe to confess to framing Harrison for Regan's murder, and in exchange, they will let him leave to an island with no extradition where he can start again. Of course, she's lying because you can do that, and he usually does, so it's her turn now. Nadia explains that if he refuses to confess, they'll break the boiler to trigger a carbon monoxide leak and frame it to look like he killed himself. Kate heads upstairs to find that Bronte has broken into the apartment. She announces that Joe isn't here, and Kate smirks knowing where he is, and asks what she wants. But Kate says that she just wanted to meet her. Bronte claims that she never wanted to be the other woman, and she probably didn't, but it still happened anyway, didn't it? Interesting. Kate admits that she doesn't know how Joe makes you forget yourself, like how Bronte forgot about the justice that she wanted for Beck in the first place. And then she questions if Bronte really doesn't believe that Joe killed Beck and reminds her that he killed a lot of people. Bronte retorts that Kate knew he was a killer too and married him anyway, but he didn't tell Kate the whole truth and he lied about wanting to change. She carries on that Bronte defended Joe after he killed for her, but Bronte says that's because it was self-defense and he has nothing to prove to her. Kate tries to reach her by relating to having been where Bronte is now, but Bronte insists that she's different because she's not a hypocrite. Of course, she has to believe that they aren't the same, or else that could mean that Joe could stop loving her too. Kate receives the message that Marianne has arrived, so she threatens Bronte to take what she wants but be out in 10 minutes or else she'll be trespassed. Joe tries to turn Nadia on Kate, questioning why she would trust the woman who helped frame her, but I'm pretty sure Joe did that part on his own, and Kate just chose to remain ignorant to it like everything else that she had Cynthia scrub. But Nadia doesn't need to trust Kate because she just wants a confession from Joe that he murdered Reese to prove her innocence. But Joe just thinks, poor Nadia, it's sad what happened to her, but that was a different man who did that. But it wasn't. It wasn't. It was this man right here who did 24 murders. It doesn't matter if you're in a self-induced disassociation. It doesn't matter if you're in love. You still murdered all of those people. Nadia knows better than to think that Joe could ever admit to what he did, and she tells him that she dreamed of being the first published author in her family and finding out where it would go with Eddie, but now she'll never know because he killed him. And then he took away her voice, threatening her into silence that her mother could never understand, leading Nadia to sometimes fear that her own mother believes she's a murderer. Joe doesn't care about this, but he tries to relate to her pain, which Nadia immediately shuts down, telling him that they are nothing alike. Kate returns and nods to Nadia that it's go time. Nods to Nadia, nods to Nadia, nods to Nadia. So Nadia asks Joe if Marianne ever haunts him as she comes downstairs, and he just stares back at her, wondering how she's alive. She admits that they fooled him and tells him to give them their confession so that this can all be over. Joe claims that he's glad she's alive and tells her that he wasn't in his right mind in London and that wasn't the real him, but it actually literally was. That was the real him, not hidden under all of the pretense, because let's drop the pretense here. Reese was concentrated Joe, unconcerned with excusing away his behavior because he doesn't believe he's doing anything wrong. He claims that he's healed and she doesn't need to be afraid of him anymore, but that sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it?
Most parents really did something wrong, and I know how it sounds, but I feel like it changed him, like he wants to do better.
People don't change.
I thought he'd be better this time. He was worse.
Joe tries to revise their history, taking credit for keeping Marianne sober and getting her custody of her daughter, but reminding her that she drove high when Juliet was a baby, saying that she almost killed her daughter, but because of him, that was all in the past. But hold on, she got custody of Juliet because Joe murdered her ex, and I'm noticing a pattern with Joe weaponizing the mistakes of the women who loved him and hurling their worst moments back at them to try and break them so he can regain control. He boldly claims that she was better because he loved her, which is a wild thing to say when you thought she was dead 5 minutes ago. Wait, hold on. He's taking credit for keeping her sober, but he thinks she died of an overdose from the pills that he gave her while she was trapped in the cage. So he would have been the reason that she relapsed and died, not the thing that kept her sober. What are you talking about? Crazy fucking guy. and people are still on his side. She tries to confront him with the reality that he destroyed her when he kidnapped her and left her to starve in a cage, revealing that he's not some white knight, he's an abuser. But he doesn't hear a word of it, insisting that he saved her and he spent his life saving women from abusive men. Marianne says that he is going to die in the cage, and she heads upstairs where Bronte sees her inside the bookstore and joins her in disbelief that she's alive. When asked if she prefers to be called Bronte or Louise, she's not quite sure, and she's just surprised to see Marianne. Until now, or originally, Bronte believed that Marianne was one of Joe's victims, so finding her alive would seem to support his innocence. But Marianne explains that they have a mutual interest and sits down for a heart-to-heart to try and get through to this woman. She says that men like Joe catch you off guard even when you think you have the facts and the instincts and the voice in your head telling you that it's too good to be true, and who better to say this than Marianne?
If there's ever, even for a fleeting moment, a tiny voice in your head, and that tiny voice is telling you, I deserve better, listen to her. That's your real, true love. And if you betray her long enough, you will lose her.
The voice warns you not to believe him when he says that he'll take care of you and keep you safe, but you ignore it because it feels so good to be loved by him when he tells you that it's the two of you against the world. She continues with the reasoning that you know what bad looks like, and you know what abuse looks like, and you know better than to fall victim to it. So when that abuse does happen to you, you justify it away because accepting it as abuse would mean accepting that you were fooled, like one of those women, like Kate, like Marianne, like Beck. And over time, he convinces you that you need him so much that you don't even know who you are without him. Marianne reminds Bronte not to forget what brought her here in the first place and assures her that she's not stupid for ending up here, and that as long as she's alive, it is never too late to leave him. It's not too late. It's never too late. Downstairs, Joe realizes that they were never going to send him to an island without extradition. Obviously, dumbass. But okay, Kate's been honest with him this whole time, so he didn't even consider that she might lie to him. That's kind of funny. When Kate admits to Joe that taking Henry from Dante and Lansing was one of the worst things she helped him do, he starts berating her and calling her a horrible mother because he knows that's important to her. But she calmly informs Joe that his words mean nothing because he is nothing. Nadia loses her cool and pulls a gun, believing that Joe doesn't deserve a peaceful death, so she wants to shoot him in the head instead, which is faster and I think definitely more peaceful than carbon monoxide poisoning. Kate stops her and they regroup upstairs with Marianne, who thinks that she might have gotten through to Bronte and sent her away. As soon as they left him unattended, I didn't know the key was coming from his arm, but I knew he was getting out of there. Now worried that Bronte could call the police, they decide that they need to kill Joe tonight, and Kate volunteers as tribute, understanding that her enabling Joe means she needs to be the one to stop him. Doing this is a form of penance for everything that she's been complicit in, and she's already been tying up her loose ends, not realizing that it would end up here. Nadia and Marianne leave Kate to do the deed, and she heads downstairs where Joe has escaped the cage with a secret key that he had hidden in his arm. What the fuck is with this guy? They fight over the gun and Kate gets shot in the stomach before Joe hears Maddie upstairs. She locks him in the basement, and through the door she says that she trusted him and he betrayed her, and he says, "You're right, I took advantage of you. I can undo it if you let me out." It's so transparent and funny how quick he can apologize when he doesn't mean it. But Maddie's not a moron. She learned her lesson in record time this season, reading him from the start and ready to kill him by the end. She starts pouring her handle around the bookstore, not believing Joe when he says that Kate's in the basement because she knows that he's a lying liar who lies, so she lights a match to set the bookstore on fire. After Maddie leaves Joe locked in the basement to die, like Paco did to Beck, he heads back downstairs and gets knocked down by Kate. They sit and suffer on the floor together as smoke fills the basement. Joe congratulates Kate on sacrificing herself to kill him and confesses to killing her dad. She laughs and says that he deserved it, and suddenly grabs her phone to start recording as she remarks about all of Joe's wives dying in fires, prompting him to correct her that he actually poisoned Love and started the fire to get rid of evidence. She sends the recording to Nadia, and Joe says, "You got me. You can die happy," before Kate agrees and nods off. And when it seems like she dies, Joe says, "I'm sorry, Bronte." That's who he cares about right now, not the woman he thought about when he tried to kill himself, but the new girl. He wishes he had a chance to do better and start over with her, but wonders if this is what he deserves. Down the street, Bronte tries to call Dawn to apologize for getting swept up in Joe and wants to come back to them, letting her know that Marianne is alive, but she realizes she forgot her wallet and heads back to Mooney's, venturing into the wildly burning building to find Kate and Joe in the basement. When she tries to wake up Kate, Joe calls to her, believing that she's come to save him, and Bronte realizes she has the opportunity to take down Joe and expose him for Beck's murder. Just in case I need to break it down, she goes downstairs looking for Marianne and Kate, finally understanding what she originally believed about Joe was true, that he is an abusive serial killer, and then she finds Kate unconscious and maybe seeming dead if she's lost a lot of blood from being shot. So when Joe sees her and thinks that she's come to save him, she feels like she has the upper hand, now knowing his game, and decides to play along to get the confession that she wanted in the first place. She helps him outside, and while he's kneeling on the ground with blood dripping down his face, like, I guess, vampire imagery, from when he tore open his arm with his teeth. Do you remember that? Joe proposes to Bronte. Could you have imagined that's what that picture was? People were thinking he bit someone's finger off or something. No, he's proposing. She considers that she should leave him and never look back, but believes that she's the only person in the world who can stop him and get justice because she's the real hero of their story. Joe and Bronte head out of town, and he wonders to himself what he did to deserve her. He thinks that the ghost from his past wanted him to believe that he doesn't deserve this, but don't worry, Joe. You deserve everything that lies ahead of you. When they pull over to admire the view, Bronte imagines how easy it would be to shoot Joe right now, but she would never find out what he did to Beck or expose him to the world. She joins him in overlooking the water as she wonders how she's going to give him the ending that he deserves. As they drive, Bronte wants to know what's really going on, and Joe admits that Kate sent something damning to the police, which was his admission to murdering his ex-wife, but he tells her that it made sense in context. It doesn't. And they're just going to have some questions, but he's not too worried. But then he suggests that they lay low anyway, still not worried, and wants to take her somewhere secluded, because as long as they have each other, they have hope. And as long as she only has him, she can't get away. He asks if she trusts him, and she's like, well, I'm here, and you're all I have, which is totally true, and exactly how Joe wants it, but also not true because she has this new awareness of who he is that she didn't have before. Joe calls the real Will, who says that he's starting to feel like a favor dispenser, because first you're asking me for this, then you're asking me for that, and now you're asking me for this. And Joe's like, oh, I'm sorry. And Will's like, nah, I'm kidding, I just had to recap for the audience. He tells Joe to keep heading towards the Canadian border as he's working on their fake IDs, and says that he's still working on a way to reach Henry, because Joe needs to tell his son that he's not abandoning him. I'm not abandoning you. Don't think I'm leaving you. Don't think that. Don't have that perception of me. Joe surprises Bronte with a preview of their castle breaking into an unbooked rental property. He warns not to leave your windows unlocked, and I will just say, I'm not coming through your windows. I'll look through them, but I'm not climbing through your unlocked windows. He starts cooking dinner and sends Bronte off to write, but only a sociopath could write under that much duress, so she looks out at the lake and plans her eventual escape, because she is planning this. I need people to understand that. At dinner, Bronte sets the scene for Joe to recognize her hesitancy and dispel it with haste. So he takes her out to a boat on the water, rowing out to the middle of the lake where he looks up at her against the stars as if she's the center of the universe. It's hard for Bronte to reconcile how good it still feels to be loved by Joe, knowing all that she knows. But she realizes that he's weaponizing that feeling, with love seeming stronger than reality or justice. But she sees through it now and lets him lead her through the romance of the night back to the bedroom, where she pulls a planted gun from under the pillow and demands to know what he did to Guinevere Beck. Joe thinks that Kate got into her head, but really Marianne got him out of it. He tries to tell her that she's too smart for him to fool her like this, and he loses his balance when she admits that she's not. She asks again how he killed Beck, but he won't tell her, so she throws him a copy of Beck's book that she bought at the gas station and tells him to redact his additions. Joe tries to pivot, insisting to her that this isn't about Beck, as if he would know, but Bronte sees now that he's been erasing her intuition and herself and her compass and that little voice in her head, so it's only fitting that she erases him. Joe self-justifies that it was an act of love and an apology to Beck for murdering her, to misappropriate her writings into a manuscript. But he clings to his delusion, believing that he can bounce back from this gunpoint confessional. He raves about Bluebeard's Castle, one of Beck's writings from her time in the cage, implying that his imprisonment encouraged her best writing. He tells Bronte that she was lost before meeting him, and that's why she connected to Beck's book, but he suspects that she came here and fixated on him because she couldn't stand being Louise Flannery, so she catfished him, but he points out that he still embraced her because he loves Bronte more than she loves herself. But not true, because Joe doesn't love, he seeks to possess. Just then, Joe gets a call from Will trying to connect him with Henry, and Bronte lets him take the call, but I can't even be mad, and I'm actually pretty glad, because it ends with Henry telling Joe that he's a monster and hanging up on him. Hopefully the last words that man ever hears from his son. Joe cries some crocodile tears over Henry knowing what he is, as love predicted he would, and he wails about becoming this person as if it simply happened to him one day. Oh, the theatrics as Joe sobs for his son and concludes that he's just unlovable, asking Bronte with tears in his eyes if this is what he really deserves. How many times is he going to ask this dumbass question? He's incapable of accepting the answer. Bronte struggles as she witnesses his tantrum, but finally realizes that it's not her place to decide what he deserves. She thought she could take on the narrative role to write their ending, accepting his proposal at the bookstore and setting the scene throughout the rental, but when she was faced with the question of what Joe deserves, she realized that it's not up to her to decide that for somebody else, and she doesn't get to write his ending. Bronte says that she's going to call the police, but Joe taunts her and asks what would be different this time, rightfully pointing out that he killed Clayton on camera and he still walked free. But she's different. With nothing else in the world and only her shaky sense of self, even she has turned on Joe. And Joe realizes that he's been delusional about Bronte and lunges at her, causing her to accidentally shoot out a light, and they fight on the floor struggling over the gun. Bronte gets shot in the stomach as she runs out of the house. She hides behind a tree and tricks Joe into chasing her in the wrong direction before running back inside to find his phone and call the police. Joe sprints full speed back to the house like a psycho and breaks through the bedroom door like a beast. Bronte escapes out the window and limps towards the lake as Joe follows her, shouting about how selfish she is to not know how good she had it with him, calling her ungrateful for not appreciating that he made her special. Finally seeing the real Joe and rejecting him entirely, Joe tackles Bronte and says that he'll show her how he killed Beck as he starts strangling her. Bronte stabs him with the stabby thing from the gas station and leads Joe towards the lake, where he lunges at her again, tackling her into the water and holding her under the water until she stops struggling. Joe says goodbye to Bronte as sirens approach, and he makes a run for it into the woods. He uses the stabby thing to fight off a cop and leaves the man on the ground, gun in hand, behind a log as he tries to flee. But the manhunt is closing in on him, forcing him to turn around, running back past the officer before spotting more flashlights ahead and hearing a gun click behind him. Bronte confronts him, having faked her drowning thanks to her earlier planning, and Joe pleads with her to shoot him, but she refuses to let him off easy, insisting that he's going to stand trial and face all of the crimes and the photos of all of the sons and daughters that he's murdered. He jumps to grab the gun for her, but she shoots him in the dick, drawing the attention of officers that pull them both away. Joe gets arrested and convicted for the murders of Beck and Love, which leads to more cases and more convictions, including the murders of Benji and Peach, and vacating the conviction of Dr. Nikki. After being released from prison and closing the chapter on Joe, Nadia returned to writing and became a teacher to help other women process their trauma. Harrison's murder charges were dropped, and Maddie was convicted for the murder of her sister and the arson at Mooney's, but considering the circumstances, she was sentenced to rehab. Kate survived the fire at Mooney's with burn scars from the flames, which she wears as a badge of penance. She left the corporation to Teddy, who transitioned it into a non-profit, not that I even know what the company does, and she returned to the art world, promoting Marianne's work to the world as she's free to live without fear now that Joe's locked up. Bronte follows through on her promise to erase Joe from Beck's book, sending it to be republished honest to her word. As imperfect and messy as it might be, it's more praised and popular than the first, but Beck won't ever get to write another one because Joe stole her future from her. Locked away in the silence of prison, Joe is tortured by the loneliness and the endlessness of it, knowing that he holds no hope of ever being held again. And in the end, after the messy trial, the horrific evidence, and being faced with the undeniable truth, Joe still denies the truth and believes that it's unfair to bear all of the blame, as we're just products of our environment and he never stood a chance. He receives a love letter and wonders why he's the crazy one in a cage if there are women out there who know all of the horrific things he's done and love him anyway. Joe ends the show breaking the fourth wall, suggesting that maybe he isn't the problem, we are. But no, not me, because I actually understand the show and I know he's bad. Penn Badgley might be Joe's #1 hater, but I'm right up there at #2. The final scene of Joe sitting in silence in a cell fills my chest with a feeling I still haven't figured out. I don't know if it's satisfaction or disgust, or if it's just surreal to realize that the ride is over. Joe goes to jail and that's it for him. No love, no happily ever after, no fantasy ending where he keeps getting away with it. He just goes to jail for all of the murders he did, and that's the end of the story. Well, his story's over. Not hers. Bronte will go on to live her life and put Joe in her rear view, shrinking every day until he's just some asshole that she dated. That did try to kill her, but you get the point. She's not going to let him dictate her story. The ending is exactly what I could have hoped for. It gives the story closure, it gives surviving characters room to say their piece, it makes important statements, and it tears down Joe in every way possible, which just makes my heart burst with joy. Originally, I said that Joe deserved jail for life because death would be an easy way out for him, and the worst fate for Joe is being locked up with nobody to obsess over and no chance of being loved, and wouldn't you know that's exactly what he got. The final moments of the finale sentencing Joe to a lonely life in jail is satisfying enough, but it's made so much better by the fact that Bronte shot off his dick before he got arrested, which means that for the rest of his sad little life, he can't even find comfort in jerking off to a fantasy. With his proclivity to masturbate to the fantasy of his fixation coming onto him, usually after he stalked or spied on them, to have that taken away from him is a very fitting punishment. Justice was served in every way possible, starting with a confrontation between Joe and his victims, calling him out for the abuser that he is. And as he's denying fault and demanding to be heard, Kate dismisses him, saying that his words mean nothing. It doesn't matter how loud he yells at her, she won't hear it because she doesn't care what he has to say. When he survives and runs off with Bronte, even she turns on him, fooling him and weaponizing love against him as he does against others. When Joe has his final call with Henry, his own son calls him a monster, which sets off Joe and exposes the extent of his self-victimization. Seeing him for who he is tends to be a death sentence as Joe brutally attacks Bronte to kill her and remove her from his narrative. But Bronte is determined to be the writer of her own story when she outsmarts him at the lake. The totality and finality of Joe's downfall is necessary because he's not a good man in a cruel world. He's a serial abuser playing the perpetual victim. Even with all of the time in the world to reflect on his actions and understand his role in the violence he perpetuated, Joe continues to deny responsibility and whines about how unfair it is to put everything, meaning the 24 murders he did, on him when he never stood a chance, just being a product of his environment. Hurt people after all. It's all just bullshit and excuses and avoiding accountability. Joe isn't a nuanced guy at the end of the day. At the end of the show, he's just an abusive piece of shit. He thinks he's the main character of this world, and we get to come along for the ride following his internal logic and justification, but there's no world where Joe's behavior is justified in the name of love. What he does and how he chooses to perceive that are two different things. One of them actually matters, and that's what he does, which is stalk, abuse, and kill people. What he thinks about what he does doesn't matter when he's doing harm to other people. I was disappointed when my body count recap video didn't do very well because I arranged it as a chronological recap of Joe's lifetime kills to see the escalation of his violence, only to find that there wasn't an escalation. Joe's first kill was a horrible accident when he was a child and couldn't really understand his actions, so that doesn't count. But his second kill happens when he's a young adult and he straight up pushes a guy off of a building for saying bitches are gonna be bitches about Joe's girlfriend, who Joe knows has been cheating on him. That's already crazy. That's already fucked up. Joe's not a victim. He lashed out at a stranger and caused his death. You go to jail for that. Instead, Joe goes to Mooney's, who tells him his life is over, not yours. Some people deserve to die. I'm sure you had your reasons. And I guess he builds his whole worldview around that going forward. Their life is over, not mine. Some people deserve to die for the right reasons, which I get to decide. When Candace tries to break up with Joe, he physically stops her from leaving his apartment and attacks her. He ties her up, drives her to the woods, and hits her head on a rock. Instead of calling for help, he buries her body and covers up her death. Where's the nuance in that? Oh, he didn't mean it. Oh, he brought a picnic. He is repeating the physical abuse of his father against a woman instead of letting her leave him. Through season 1, we get to experience firsthand how it gets to that point when Joe spots Beck and decides that she's going to fill a role in his life as he dreams of living in a romance story. Because Joe's such a romantic, he just wants to love and be loved, and he doesn't want to be anything like his abusive father. He wants to protect women by projecting his fantasies onto them and chipping away at the parts of their lives that don't fit into his narrative. The comments made this season about Joe stripping away the identity and the compass of his targets ties back to season 1. Joe met Beck and decided that he wanted her in his story, but Benji doesn't quite fit into their love story, so he's gotta go. But oh, it's okay because it's in the name of protecting Beck, because she totally needs protecting, and definitely not to get rid of any competition or distraction. And same for Peach. Beck needs to be protected from Peach because Peach is bad and a predator, so Joe has to be her noble savior by stalking them out of town, breaking into the house where they're staying, and killing Beck's best friend to protect her. Of course, Joe is right there to be the supportive boyfriend in the emotional aftermath of the devastation that he specifically caused. And then Joe gives Beck a job at Mooney's to consolidate more of her time, and he feels threatened when she starts going to therapy because a therapist could get into her head, or really get Joe out of her head. Beck had a whole life before Joe. She was a person. She had dreams and desire and baggage and shit to figure out and a path to forge, and she mattered to other people, and she made an impact on the students in her class, and she had stories to tell the world, and Joe just picked her one day and decided that she would fit into his narrative or her story would end. didn't know her for her, and he didn't see her for who she was. Throughout the season, he sees things about Beck that he doesn't like or he doesn't prefer, and he excuses them away, or he just cuts off that part of her life. I love the women of you, but it is never about them. Joe's quote-unquote love is never about who they actually are as people. It's only how Joe can fit them into his story until the fantasy wears off and they stray too much from the plot, and they need to be killed off so that he can scope out his next target. Joe's attraction to Beck's love of writing and literature is superficial, as evidenced by his reference to a book that she would never reference. He didn't know her like he didn't know love, and she calls him out on it, saying that he was busy gazing at a fantasy, and he was. He is. That's all he knows how to do. By contrast, Bronte's connection with Beck is genuine, and she knew her well enough to notice what didn't sound like her writing in the book. Understand how significant that connection is, because that is what led to Joe's downfall. He met Beck and decided that she would be his or nothing, so he stalked her, invaded her privacy, infiltrated her life, murdered her friends, and eventually imprisoned and murdered her, all while the meanwhile claiming that she was so special and he loved her so much, and then bastardized her writings into a book to be published to suit his narrative and allow him to get away with murder. But he didn't love her because he didn't know her. Their connection was never real, no matter how much Joe tries to convince you or himself that he is capable of that. But Beck mattered to Bronte, who came to New York to be a playwright and got valuable feedback and encouragement from Beck as her TA. They weren't best friends, but Bronte knew her well enough because she saw her as a real person like Joe never did. And if Joe only ever sees these women as a companion to him in his love story, it's easy for him to turn on them when they don't play along. These women are just regular people trying to live their lives and maybe find love, but Joe doesn't see them that way. He sees them as the perfect piece to finish his puzzle, even if he has to cut off all of their rough edges to make them fit. So Bronte leans into it and plays the role of a woman who can be romanced and swept away by Joe until she actually is romanced and swept away by Joe after becoming untethered from her original reason. She doesn't have the support system or the conviction of belief to fend off the doubts that Joe starts planting in her mind. What Joe does works because he's firm in his belief that all he needs is somebody to love and be loved, and he himself is convinced of that. Because growing up, the only stable thing that Joe had through their poverty and homelessness was his mother, who loved him. She was centered in his young life, and his world revolved around her. He had nothing else but her love, so she became his home. It's a deeply held belief and worldview formed in childhood and festering for years. Meanwhile, Bronte's belief is based on circumstantial evidence and theories, and her outlook is skewed by toxic romance novels, leaving her vulnerable to Joe's mind game, especially as she loses herself into the character of Bronte, because it's easier and more exciting than facing herself as Louise when she doesn't know who she is after she gave up on her writing dream to take care of her mother. After Joe makes Bronte doubt herself the first time, it gets easier every time to excuse away his behavior or her own instinct to leave. She says in the interview that it wasn't a single moment, it just snuck up on her. He gave her a job, he gave her an apartment, he had an explanation for the cage, he protected her from her own friend who was being violent. The more that Joe consumed of her time and took over her life, the less of herself that she had, and she didn't have that much to begin with. But by the end, after hearing directly from women who have been in her situation that aren't belittling her, but just trying to get through to her, Bronte wakes up and she realizes the game that Joe plays, and Uno reverses it on him to deliver the ultimate poetic justice. A life of loneliness for the man who just wants to be loved. But not by the women who write to him in prison, the ones who know everything about him and still love him anyway. Yeah, he hates those women. Is that not what he wanted from Kate and Bronte, but now he's getting it from these other women and suddenly it's not what he wants anymore? Oh, because it was never about that. Because it's only ever been about control. Like when Joe was with Beck, he killed for her in secret, and when she found out, she rejected him, so he killed her. But then he was with Love, and when she found out that he killed somebody, she not only embraced him for it, but killed for him, which disgusted him so much that he almost killed her. Turns out she's pregnant, so fast forward a year later, she wants to kill somebody, and Joe refuses to be made to kill for her. What he was begging Kate to do this season, he was refusing to do for Love. But then he turns around and starts killing in secret for Marianne, because it's about control. He wants to kill who he wants to kill, and he wants things to go how he wants them to go. He repeats the pattern of chasing a woman to recreate that dynamic with his mom, coming full circle when they're squatting in a rental on the run from Joe's ex, and Bronte has nothing in the world outside of Joe, and he literally centers her in the universe. Are we going to eat romantic gestures, Joe? Maybe his problems do stem from the instability of his childhood or the abandonment of his mother, but his trauma absolves him of nothing. Maybe Ron was abused as a kid. Does that make it okay for him to beat Claudia? No. Henderson admitted that he was. Does that justify his sex crimes against minors? No. If you can recognize the abuse, in Ron, in Ryan, in Henderson. You need to recognize it in Joe. That is what this show is for. This show is saying, hey, it doesn't always look like that. Sometimes it looks like this. And we need to understand that. And we need to stop letting these men get away with things because they justify it in whatever way. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. He hurt people. There are consequences for that. It's that simple. But I bet you that both of those men think that they're writing their own stories just like Joe. Maybe not grand romance stories, but they think that they're the main character and everything they do has a reason. Everything they do, they can justify. When Ron puts Claudia in the hospital, he excuses that away because he was drunk, just like Joe dismissing everything in London because he was disassociating. The final words of the show, pointing to us, the audience, as the problem, tries to drive the point home that we shouldn't be falling for this stuff, for the reasoning and the rationalizing and the sympathizing with this character and men like him. And yet, the response I've seen to this season and closing out the story as a whole is a little upsetting to see how many people just don't get it, or worse, they're raging against it and exposing themselves as the internalized Danes that they are. It's crazy to me to refuse to listen to any of the women's stories in this show and then turn around and say they're boring characters. Tell me why I saw a post asking if they could just skip all of Bronte's scenes. Why are you watching the show if you don't care about the story it's telling? What is that? I don't understand. I'm not angry. I'm just very confused by it. It's one thing to want Joe to get away with it from season to season. That's understandable because it's a good show and it's fun to watch. But knowing this was the last season and still wanting the abusive serial killer to get away with all of the murder and violations of women's lives is crazy to me. The final season of this show showed in no uncertain terms that Joe Goldberg is irredeemable and he has always been this way. I can't wait to rewatch the show from the start and savor the anticipation of the poetic justice that I know awaits Joe in the end. I really hope this show has been as meaningful and entertaining and thought-provoking to you as it has been to me, and if you've made it to the end of this video, I would love to hear your thoughts about the final season down in the comments. Be sure to like and subscribe, please and thank you, and stay tuned because I'm probably going to make 100 more videos about the show. I'm officially swearing off the subreddit because I can't stand to see another post criticizing the attractiveness of the murder victims in the serial killer show, or the bees in the credits, as if there's not 1,000 posts already. I'm sorry. Your gender can be whatever you want, but your name cannot be a single letter. If you want to be B with 2 E's or spell it like Lee and turn it into a tragedy, but a spell should be more than a word and a name should be more than a letter. Joe says that while the Lockwoods slept on silk sheets. I can't fucking say that. Slept on silk sheets. And she's a dental hygienist from Ohio. Fucking Ohio. And believes it's unfair to bear all of the blame as we're just products of our environment and he never stood a chance. This fucking guy. I'm getting mad again. I'm getting mad. I hate him. He's in jail. He's not real, but I hate him. Because Joe isn't real. Joe's spirit exists in the world. Okay, there are Joes in this world. There are Danes in this world. There are Joes in this world. There are Joes, there are Rons, there are Danes, there are Hendersons. And you can't only notice the Rons and the Hendersons.